Good afternoon. I'm Alexis Stevens, the Director of Outreach here at the Center for Heirs Property Preservation, and I have the honor of moderating this Lunch and Learn panel about environmental justice. We have several of our partners, all of whom have specialized expertise in this area. I'm joined today by, and if you could just wave when I call your name, Chris DeScherer of the Southern Environmental Law Center, David Ray with the Low Country Land Trust, and Dr. Janae Davis of the Waccamaw River Alliance. Oh, American Rivers, I'm sorry. American Rivers. I apologize for that. But also, before we get started, I wanted to really celebrate Dr. Janae Davis. She just recently completed her PhD. And so if we could give her a round of applause.
Thank you.
Yes, proud. This panel was centered on environmental inequity and justice. So I would like to start today's panel with a quote that really spoke to me by Nelson Mandela, and I believe it really encapsulates this topic. We cannot afford to wait for others to stand up for the environment, as nobody stands to lose more than we do. It is our duty to be productive in the battle to protect our natural environment. The right to a healthy environment and communities is a crucial human right because it directly impacts our quality of life. So, with that, I would like to get started with questions. We're going to take a couple of minutes with each panelist to please introduce yourself and provide a broad overview of what your organization does. And I would like to start with Dr. Janae Davis.
Great. Thank you so much, Alexa. And I've said this several times today. Center for Heirs Property is by far my favorite nonprofit. You all do amazing work. Really kudos to you all. I mean, the work that you're doing, the meaningful impact that you all are having in the world, it is really inspiring. So thank you so much for all the work you all do. Thank you. My name is Janae Davis. I am an Associate Director of Conservation at a national nonprofit called American Rivers. We're in all 50 states, all regions around the country. Basically, what we do is that we protect rivers, we restore rivers, and we conserve clean water for people and nature. That's our tagline. But I'll tell you what that really means for my work. I work here in South Carolina. I'm based in Myrtle Beach. And for me, what that mission means for me is to, number one, preserve clean drinking water. This area, this region, as you all know, South Carolina in general is one of the fastest growing states in the United States. And that poses threats to our drinking water supplies through development, through population growth. My job, a part of my job, is to make sure that that development is sustainable and that we're protecting our riverside lands so that that water that's coming into the utilities, the water utilities intake is clean. And what that translates into, y'all, in reality is that if the water coming into the utility intake is clean, then utility does not have to purchase a lot of chemicals and other types of agents to treat that water, because when they have to do that, they pass that cost or those costs onto their customers like you all. And so it's about clean water, but it's also about affordable drinking water. Another thing I'm working on is reducing flood risks. The Low Country is no stranger to flooding, and I'm working with communities, especially communities of color, indigenous communities, and Gullah Geechee communities to address flooding in the region. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Thank you. Chris?
All right. Well, I just want to second what Dr. Janae said. Just in terms of it's a real honor to be here. It's a great organization. We really enjoy working with the center and its staff. So I'm glad to be here today. I am the South Carolina Office Director for the Southern Environmental Law Center. We are based in Charlottesville, Virginia. We work in 6 states throughout the Southeast, and we are essentially a nonprofit legal advocacy organization. So we represent other nonprofit groups throughout the Southeast on environmental issues, conservation issues, environmental justice issues, and we go out and we raise our money from funders, and then we represent other nonprofits for free. We don't charge for our legal time. And so what that means here in South Carolina is we work with other nonprofits on big infrastructure projects like highways, like the proposed extension of the Interstate 526 Martin Clark Expressway, or some of y'all may have heard about the Corps' proposal to build a $1 billion seawall around Charleston. Those are the types of projects that we work on when community groups or nonprofits have concerns or are opposed to those types of projects. And I'll stop there.
Thank you. David.
Good afternoon, everybody. So great to be here with you and with the center, which is one of our partners that we just enjoy so much working with. My name is David Ray. I'm the Chief Conservation Officer for the Low Country Land Trust. We're based in Charleston, and we are one of over 1,500 land trusts throughout the country. Our mission is to protect land and water forever, nurture relationships between people and place, and connect conservation to community. And we've been doing this for about 35 years. We have protected land in 14 counties in the coastal plain of South Carolina, and we work in 17. So there's a few counties we're still trying to get some work done in. But over that 35-year period, we have protected about 150,000 acres, and that represents about 500 different land ownership interests. So the way we do our work is largely through what are called conservation easements, which is where land continues to be privately owned, but there's a way to reach an agreement between an organization like ours and a landowner to restrict some of the uses that can be made of property in order to accomplish conservation. It can involve any number of things like the amount of development that can occur on the property, how forestry might occur on the property, usually prohibiting mining on the property, etc. A lot of different things. And we are charged with all of the ones where we hold a conservation easement. We go out every year and visit the property, try to meet with the landowner if they're available, and make sure that those restrictions that have been put on the property are actually being adhered to. And there's also reserved rights in these documents, and so the landowner may want to exercise those reserved rights, and a lot of times we end up conferring with them about going ahead and doing that, making sure it works under the terms of the easement. We also own a little bit over a dozen pieces of property, and they range from everything from a small island in the Stono River, which was the very first project the land trust did 35 years ago, to the forest surrounding the Angel Oak on Johns Island. We own about 35 acres there, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. And these properties range everywhere from rarely, but we do have them less than an acre, to 12,000 acres on Brosnan Forest, which is owned by Norfolk Southern Corporation. So that's the heart of our work, working with landowners to protect land. A lot of it's in rural areas. Sometimes it can be in urban areas or on the edge of urban areas. And the other thing we try to do is outreach to engage people, either businesses, young professionals, communities where we're doing this land protection, to educate people on conservation and be in conversation with them about it.
Thank you. So my next question, as we talk about the fact that, climate change and development tends to have such a big impact on communities of color, right? So the question is, what does environmental justice mean to you? And tell us your organization's goals as they pertain to addressing inequality and promoting conservation and resiliency in communities of color. And so for that one, I'd like to start with Chris.
So, to me, environmental justice is the idea that all people and all communities deserve an equal level of environmental protection under the laws. All people have the right to live in communities that are safe and healthy. And so that's kind of, when it gets down to it, that's my view of environmental justice. And, you know, our organization has been around for about over 30 years. And over the years, we've worked on environmental justice matters, but, you know, we want to work on even more environmental justice issues. And we've worked with conservation groups over the last few decades, and increasingly we're working with a wider variety of nonprofit organizations. So just a couple of examples. We here in Charleston, we've worked with the Phillips community on the Highway 41 proposal that some of y'all may be familiar with. So that was a proposal to widen a highway, you know, through the Phillips community, which would have resulted in the taking of houses and would have exacerbated flooding problems in that community. And Charleston County wanted to widen the road right through the community. So what we do is we represent the community. We represented some other environmental groups, and we're still engaged in that process. We brought in experts to design, you know, an alternative. Like, how can we solve traffic issues out here without further burdening this community? This is a good example of an environmental justice issue to me, because this community has been around, was established shortly after the Civil War. It's been there forever. It used to be a rural area. And the cause of the traffic problem in that part of Charleston County is not being caused by the Phillips community. It's being caused by all the other newer developments that have grown up around the Phillips community. So one might ask, if you're going to solve traffic issues in that part of Charleston County, why would you widen the road through this community? Why wouldn't you find another way to solve traffic problems? So that's the kind of thing that we want to work on. That's the kind of thing where we went out working with the leaders of the Phillips community, hired experts to design alternatives. You know, how could you solve traffic problems out here without further burdening this community? And so far, you know, it looks like Charleston County has embraced an approach that would actually avoid damaging the Phillips community. So that's the kind of project we want to work on, and we want to do even more of that. And, you know, y'all mentioned sort of the intersection of environmental justice and flooding. Janae, I think you talked about that. And Alexa, I think that was part of your question. Cut me off when you're ready. But
No, you've got time. Go ahead.
but there's another project that I think is really instructive and that we're working on right now, and we've got comments due next week. But that's this, I already referred to it as the Corps of Engineers wants to build this 8-mile long, 12-foot high wall around Charleston to protect Charleston from storm surge and sea level rise. And one of the things that jumps off the page when you read the study for this $1 billion project is how, you know, they're going to invest all this money to build this wall around downtown Charleston, but it stops short of certain communities, like the Rosemont community, which has been there for a long time. And just kind of in the initial, anyone here from the Corps of Engineers today? I don't want to offend anybody, but in their initial study, you know, they barely mentioned the Rosemont community. They barely explain why, you know, they're going to put the wall where they want to put it and why it's going to stop where it's going to stop. And so, you know, to us, it kind of jumps out. Like, you know, folks in the Rosemont community have the same flooding problems as folks downtown. And so anyway, it's another example, Alexa, I think, of how communities are going to try to address flooding issues. They're going to spend a lot of money to try and prevent against flooding. And you will see the intersection of these climate issues and these disparate treatment of communities. I'll stop there.
Thank you. Right on time. So next I'll go with David.
All right. So what does environmental justice mean to you is the question. And one thing I just want to say to kick it off is that even on issues, just general environmental issues, one of the things that I always have to remind myself and talk with our partners about is that the role of the land trust on any environmental issue is we fill a certain niche of the whole big picture of conservation. We typically, traditionally, land trusts have not viewed themselves as advocacy organizations, and there's other great advocacy organizations that speak up, speak, loudly, truth to power. And we have, in our community, we've tended, because our job is to try to work with landowners to do a transaction that protects that land, we've kind of stayed in the background on advocacy issues so that we can be in relationship with landowners of all stripes to help accomplish that. That's only a part of the picture of what's needed in terms of conservation, and it's the same in terms of environmental justice. So I kind of, in answering the question of what does it mean to you, there's a part of me that's, well, what does it mean to me, David Ray, and what does it mean to the Low Country Land Trust as an institution that fills a certain niche? I'm not sure exactly always where those two coincide and where they're separate, so I'm just going to speak to it. We have in recent times gotten more into what starts to look like the advocacy realm on some issues that I consider environmental justice issues, and one of them is the Highway 41 Phillips community issue that Chris talked about. We did something very unusual in that case, which was comment on a road project. That's just not the kind of thing that our land trust has had as a strategy, at least not very frequently in the past. We took a little different tact on it, but at heart was the concern for the people of this community and what would happen to their lives with the road going through and why that happened. Looking back, this relates to the issue of land ownership as well, because we all know, and I think the center has done an incredible job of highlighting why there's an imbalance in land ownership and how much land ownership has changed over the years. So why is this traffic problem happening to the Phillips communities? Because of what was allowed to happen on surrounding communities. So we wrote letters and we talked about the resources that were at stake. And Phillips community is an incredible cultural and historical resource. There's also a lot of people's lives who are at stake, besides just the idea of it as a resource. We wrote in support of not doing the worst case scenario through Phillips. And we talked to county council members about that. We also, on Johns Island, we have been partnering with the center going back to before my time when Sam Cook was working at the center, starting out a partnership between our land trust and the center and others to go beyond our typical tools of conservation easements and buying land, and try to figure out ways that we could work together to try to preserve land retention even for smaller landowners who our typical tools may not work very well for a number of reasons having to do with tax laws and the costs of doing transactions. How can we come up with ways that help landowners beyond our typical tools? And we're continuing that partnership with the Center and the Coastal Conservation League and the Open Space Institute. We are just bringing on board this coming month a Sea Islands program director who will be focused on, particularly on Johns and Waccamaw Island, working not only on our traditional strategies, but working with smaller landowners and land retention issues. And so we've worked with the center also through our mapping department to try to identify landowners on Johns Island, particularly in settlement communities and limited resource communities who may not be taking advantage of the property tax laws that could help get their property taxes lowered either through agricultural use or just the homestead use. So that's a way we've been able to partner to bring justice to people who might not be able to retain their land if this information didn't get to them. We can only do that as partners. And I see maybe my time is up. So let me just say one more thing, if I might. I mentioned to you at the beginning that we have conservation work that we check in on every year on 500 different land interests. I think I can only think of one of those properties that is owned by an African American landowner. And I want that to change. We want that to change as an organization. We want to be serving a wide breadth of landowners. There's all kinds of reasons for why that hasn't been the case in the past, including the change in land ownership over time. And so we want to find ways to build relationships with African American landowners and figure out whatever tool works to have more of those interests increasingly be partnering with African American landowners.
Thank you. Thank you, David. So, Janae, would you like me to repeat the question? Or are you ready?
No, I think I'm good.
Thank you.
I would say what environmental justice means to me is similar to what Chris was just saying, is that, you know, all people have the right to live, you know, in safe and healthy communities, and then also to have access and to enjoy their resources, and to also be able to participate in decision making around those resources. I think that, you know, for me, that I try to tackle all of those at the same time. But I also want to talk about a little bit about, you know, when we talk about environmental justice, what it means. And I think that, you know, I think there has been historically an issue with when people say environmental justice, they're usually talking about urban communities in polluted places and related to, you know, Black and brown peoples. And that is true, but we forget about our rural communities. We forget about our natural resources. We forget about land and rivers and oceans and how all of that it can be is wrapped up in environmental justice issues. And so with that, I think that, you know, when we're talking about conservation, we can think about environmental justice, conservation as an environmental justice issue. When you think about, for instance, the fact that a lot of communities have not been able to participate in conversations about their natural resources. That's an environmental justice issue. When we talk about the fact that the environmental movement itself is a largely white male led movement, like that's an environmental justice issue. And so for me, I'm trying to really broaden what it means when we say environmental justice. And I'm trying to do that through my work. Another thing, and in a perfect world, environmental justice will also mean tackling just really like systemic racism. And when I say systemic racism, tackling the reasons why, for instance, we have heirs property in the first place, right? Tackling why, the root causes of Black land loss. And those are issues, I think, that go sometimes beyond the scope of our work because they seem so large, so big, and so like, where do we start? Where do we start to tackle these issues? And that's why I appreciate Center for Heirs Property for really, like, I mean, in a way, it's trying to, you know, take a teaspoon of water out of the ocean and you know, take care of the ocean that way, one teaspoon at a time. But I mean, I think we all have to start somewhere. And so I think heirs property, I think Black land laws are the products of systemic racism. I think that they can be tackled, and that's what I'm trying to do in my work. I'll tell you a little bit about a program, a partnership that we've been involved in recently. Anybody from Bucksport? Bucksport is an heirs property community in Horry County, Gullah Geechee community on the Waccamaw River, right next to the Waccamaw National Wildlife Refuge. Bucksport has basically been flooded out, and I'm talking about severe flooding every year since 2015, since the major flood that we had in the state. They have petitioned to the Horry County to help them address flooding. They have not been, number one, they have not been listened to, and then number two, they have basically been excluded from these circles of power. When I first approached them to ask, well, how can American River support you? They said, you all are really just the first organization to reach out to us and offer some support. And so I said, well, let's tackle this, and let's tackle it from a point of view of tackling systemic racism, the ways that they have been politically excluded, the ways that they have been economically just disinvested in. Let's talk about the ways that their cultural resources are in danger. Let's talk about the ways that heirs property factors into all of this, and how water quality and flooding factors into all of this. And it's all related, and we have to tackle all of these things at one time because it is a system that is creating all of these issues, and we have to tackle these issues holistically. And so I've been working to put together a coalition in which Alexis Center for Heirs Property is a part. Southern Environmental Law Center is also a member of that coalition to really support the community in addressing flooding, but also addressing 400 years of basically exclusion and disinvestment. And so I don't want to talk too much. I can talk more about it, but I don't want to use up too much space. But that's what environmental justice means to me, and it's largely how American Rivers is tackling environmental justice moving forward. So thank you.
Thank you. And just to add to that, we do have an article available on the Hoover app where to show the work that Janae has been spearheading with that community, Bucksport community. One more time. Good. Okay. So just last question for David. Start with David. So what's the biggest challenge you face in addressing inequality and promoting conservation, and how are you addressing those obstacles?
Yeah, so I think there's sort of the internal and there's the external. So internally, as Janae mentioned, there is generally a lack of diversity within the conservation field. That's changing a lot, but not nearly enough and not quickly enough. And so one of the things that we're trying to do to address that, a couple of things. One is our board makeup. And we recently, in the last couple of years, brought on Albert George from the South Carolina Aquarium onto our board. He's a low country native and conservation professional, and he can speak to these issues in a way few people can in terms of inspiring. But we have more work to do on that as well. And with our staffing, to not go about the same old usual way of trying to recruit people, but taking extra steps to try to broaden the pool of applicants when we do have an open position, which is not all that frequent, but we need to take extra steps and not just sort of hope that the same old thing results in a broader candidate pool. I think a challenge on the thing I spoke about earlier, which is working more and directly with African American landowners, is a couple of things. One is, as I mentioned, we've done a lot of conservation easements over the year, and we have a lot of constituents who think, well, that's what we do. We just do conservation easements. So just keep doing conservation easements. And do big acres, because everybody likes to hear lots of acres got protected. We have to, I think, shift a little bit within our own organization, the mindset of what we have to do to accomplish environmental justice within the kind of work that we do. Because it's sort of like, people are concerned about the idea sometimes of mission creep within an organization, and they might say, well, there are bigger issues in society, but they're not really the issues of our organization. This is me, stop taking off my LLT hat, think of it the way Janae phrased it, which is these are tied to larger issues. And we think of nature in a holistic way. We think of how it works as a holistic system. Why would we not think of this endeavor that's a social endeavor, conservation, as also being holistic? So I think we need to work more to bring along our constituents and stakeholders to understand that that is a part of our area of concern and get on the same page about how we try to move forward strongly to do better in that respect.
Thank you. Chris.
The biggest challenge is that
The biggest challenge you face in addressing inequality and promoting conservation, and how have you addressed those obstacles?
So I think I'm going to cheat. I think there's more than one challenge, or I might mention a couple of challenges. But getting back to something Janae said about how the problem is systemic, I think in our work we see that very clearly. And I'm going to go back to this Charleston seawall project because it's top of mind for me, because we've got to submit comments on it in about a week. But when the Corps of Engineers, for example, when they decide to take on $1 billion project, their decision about whether to do the project, where to put the project, is driven by a cost-benefit economic analysis. And when the Corps and agencies like it, when they articulate the reasons why they want to move forward with the project, and they talk about the economic conclusions they've reached, and how this alternative has a higher cost-benefit ratio than this other one. One challenge is they don't show their math, right? They don't give you enough information for you to actually check their math. They're just kind of asking you to take their word for it. That's one problem. The other problem is that when you think about why are we proposing a wall to protect downtown Charleston versus leaving out communities like Rosemont? And I think, frankly, it comes down to their math. And, where are you going to get the biggest bang for your buck, according to the Corps of Engineers and their economic analysis? It's by protecting the Battery and East Bay Street. It's not by protecting Rosemont. So, to me, and I can't, because they don't show their math, I can't tell you conclusively that I am right about this, but I certainly think, if not in Charleston, these decisions, which are huge infrastructure decisions, certain people are going to benefit, other people are not going to benefit, comes down to their economic calculation, which they're not even sharing with the public or really explaining. So that is, to me, a great example, or I shouldn't use the word great, terrible example of what Janae is talking about, that these decisions, it's kind of baked into the system. So, we will be fighting that here on the Charleston seawall, but it's a much larger problem. So when you think about it, it feels, really challenging and, to some extent overwhelming. Although I will say, we have a new administration in Washington, D.C., which thinks about these issues a lot differently than the previous administration, without getting into politics. But so that's a step in the right direction. I guess just a couple other thoughts. One is, it's really challenging, especially in a state like South Carolina, because there's so many examples of it. It's not just one or two bad examples. I just think about the projects we are working on, and we're just one organization working on a handful of projects. But if you think about the I-526 extension, the I-526 widening, the Southern Evacuation Lifeline project, which would impact the Bucksport community, the proposal to upgrade the bridge to Hilton Head Island, Highway 41. These are all massive infrastructure projects, and they all, in my view, because we work on all, to some extent, present environmental justice issues. They're disproportionately impacting Black communities in coastal South Carolina. So it's a little bit overwhelming because there's so many examples of it. And I guess the final thought I have is on these highway projects, some of these projects were I-526, Interstate 26, Highway 41, they were built originally a long time ago, and they were built in and through Black communities. So now when traffic is getting worse and people want to expand these highways are already built, right? So they're already in these locations, they're already impacting these communities. And so now, people will say, well, we can't build another I-26, we just need to widen it here. But it's just going to continue this legacy of environmental injustice.
Yes.
So I'll stop there.
Thank you. Janae?
Yeah, I totally agree with both David and Chris. The challenges that you all are seeing are also the challenges that I'm seeing. The challenge you talked about, David, with mission creep. American Rivers, the organization that I work for, is also a conservation organization. We've been lucky that our staff has just been really on board with just building a more inclusive and equitable organization, but our board has been very slow. As a lot of times boards are a little bit slower, and so we've been working on changing that. We've actually lost board members because they felt like, American Rivers is an environmental organization. We're not a social justice organization, and so they decided to leave their positions, and our leadership basically said, well, you feel that way, and we wish you well. And so it feels good to be a part of an organization that is supportive of equity and justice and inclusion in that way. But there is that real problem with folks, a lot of staff and executives and board members in leadership feeling like tackling environmental justice and climate justice is basically mission creep. So, and I think there is a movement in the environmental movement or the conservation movement to make it a more diverse movement, a more just movement, more inclusive movement. But that work is being hampered by that very issue of a lot of folks in leadership feel like it's, tackling environmental justice is mission creep. Also, I would say, and going on what you were saying, Chris, I think that we have a lot of political and economic agendas that just do not include Black and brown communities. In fact, and this is my hypothesis, is that a lot of these road projects and other development agendas, what we see in Horry County, if anybody's been to Myrtle Beach, out of control. But these projects, and we've known this through studies of what we call environmental racism, is that a lot of these projects are slated through Black communities because they are relying on the fact that Black communities tend to not hold the political sway and the economic sway to make a difference, to be a part of the political process and to influence the process. Not only do they rely on that, but they a lot of times you will see, and as you were saying, Chris, where's the information is hoarded, right? The information is kept from these communities, and it's almost an act of Congress sometimes, or the act of legislature of your local government to actually get access to this information. Or you need to know somebody, you need to have those political or social networks to actually get the information that you need. And so I think that definitely that's a challenge as well. I think what, we as conservation organizations, what we're able to do is that we do work with local governments, and we do, in a lot of cases, at the national level, we work with federal governments. We do have access to information, and we can facilitate the passing along that information to Black and Brown communities to build awareness. So it's one of the things that I'm working on in the work that I do, is just to be a resource, facilitate access to information, and facilitate the process of bringing these communities to the table in decision making. And not only bringing these communities to the table, because anybody can, you can invite somebody to the table, right? But will their interests and their values be seriously considered, right? Will they be integrated into the actual decision making? And will these people be taken seriously? So it's also that process as well. Otherwise, it just becomes a checkbox, right? We invited these people to the table and check, without really taking taking on the real work to be truly inclusive. I think another thing that's happening is another challenge is internal to a lot of the communities that we work with, just because of just the systemic disinvestment over the years. We're working in communities that are also trying to tackle or deal with COVID, right? Communities where, because you're in COVID, the participation sometimes is difficult to get because you have people who are under quarantine or people who are hospitalized. And then because we're in a pandemic, we have to be in virtual meeting settings. So also making sure that people can participate virtually, and that that technology is actually accessible and people know how to use that technology as well. So that's a challenge. And then also another challenge is supporting communities in building their own advocacy networks, because I believe that as conservation organizations, we can definitely support communities in realizing the way of life that they want to achieve. But for me, that process has to be driven by the community. It has to be led by the community. And so if the community is not on the same page, right? They're not pulling in the same direction. It's difficult for them to tell you what they want, And so the question that we're working on now is, how do we support communities in building that capacity, getting on the same page, and supporting their leadership of the initiatives that we're working on together. So I'll leave it there, but thank you.
Thank you, Janae. So I will have one really quick question, 30 seconds for each of you. Really, so, as we talk about conservation, as a layperson that doesn't know anything about conservation, what are the resources? Where do I go to hear and learn more about conservation and how it impacts me? 30 seconds. Okay. Yeah, just we start with Janae and then just go to the right.
Yeah, you can contact me. Janae Davis, AmericanRivers.org. But also you can go to, it's called SciWorks. It's online. It's a website that's managed by the state of South Carolina. And you can go and find the conservation organizations that are working throughout South Carolina. But yeah, that's a good question though, because I actually don't. Is there a repository, a place where people can go and just know what conservation organizations are working in their area?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
There are a lot of differences.
This is probably a bad suggestion, but I mean, you can sign up for like public notice, like DHEC, Corps of Engineers, EPA. You can sign up on their mailing list, so at least you get notice of proposals ahead of time, which sometimes it's painful to read through these notices because they're not written in a way that's really understandable, but at least you have a shot of knowing like what's coming.
Okay. Thank you.
As Janae said, I'm happy to speak with anybody about the kind of conservation work that we do. and point them to resources if it's something that we're not in. And my email is dray@lowcountrylandtrust.org. Very long email address to type. But we have a website, lowcountrylandtrust.org, where there's some information. And the community of similar organizations to ours, there's an umbrella organization in South Carolina called the South Carolina Land Trust Network. And there's a website for that. I think it's scltn.org. And that points to land trusts in different parts of the state of South Carolina. And there's also a national umbrella organization called the Land Trust Alliance. And landtrustalliance.org is their website. And they have a Find a Land Trust page, as well as a lot of different pages with resources about different ways both to do land protection transactions of the kind I've spoken about, but also something that we refer to frequently as community conservation, which is, having pieces of land that are open to the public to access for various reasons, to hike, or culturally important areas, or community forests. So that's another resource to learn about the kind of conservation we do.
Well, I wanted to thank you all for your time. We have questions? We do. So we have time for about 2 questions. Huh? We have 10 more minutes? 10 minutes? Okay. We have time for questions.
And I did want to make a correction. The website that I was telling you about, it's not SciWorks, it's SciWay. Sorry about that, y'all.
All right, so I will be reading the question, just one question off of our virtual platform. So, Dr. Davis, has your organization made any inroads in helping the buck sport community?
Yeah, yes, we have made some inroads. I think what has been the biggest inroad that we've made is just establishing trust. Because that takes time. But we've done that. We've worked to establish trust, and then also I would say, we have a great coalition of people who have really stepped forward to support the community in addressing flooding and all these interrelated issues related to heirs property and their cultural resources and economic disempowerment. But we have several assessments in the works. We have a sustainability assessment and a preliminary, what we call a hydrologic assessment, basically to understand why it's flooding so much in Bucksport. We also are supporting the community in taking advantage of the American Rescue Plan. That funding some of that funding that was handed on to Horry County. And so we've made some inroads, and there's a lot of moving parts and projects in the works. And so ask me next year, and hopefully we'll have some definitive results for you.
Okay, I have a few questions. David, can you repeat what a conservation easement is?
Sure. Yeah. So the question is, what is a conservation easement? It's essentially a legal transaction. It's a deed type document, but unlike a normal deed, if you were just selling, your piece of land to somebody else, which can be about 2 or 3 pages, a conservation easement tends to be around 15 to 20 pages long. And what it does is it's not actually deeding the land over to an organization like ours, but what it's doing is restricting some of the rights that come along with land ownership and putting them in the land trust's care to make sure that nobody down the road, and these are usually in perpetuity, although there are some programs, federal government programs, that do it for a term of years. And we just make sure that the restricted rights are not exercised. There's also reserved rights. So let's say you could have built 100 homes on a piece of property under the zoning laws. The conservation easement may say you can build 2 homes or 5 homes or 10 homes. And the purpose of that is to not totally develop the property and leave it so that it's protecting things like water quality that flows off of the site, or wildlife habitat on the site, or agricultural land, all those kinds of things. And so the landowner keeps owning it. They pay property taxes on it still. And all the land trust does is come back every year and check on those terms to see that they're still being adhered to.
Okay, so Chris, you mentioned the 526 expansion project, right? Or the widening project. Has the center been called in for like your expertise on what they think it's going to do to specifically the Highland Terrace and the Liberty Park area?
So we are working with some organizations, and we have engaged in the process to, one of the things we're arguing for is more mitigation for those communities. And we're the lawyers, so we're not necessarily like the people on the ground, but we are working with folks on the ground that have relationships with the folks in those communities.
So do you have like a representative? So I guess you wouldn't have a representative in the 526 office off of like Gasite Square, right?
We're located on East Bay Street downtown.
Okay. Jason, could a land trust or a conservation easement be used in those areas where they're wanting to expand 526 to protect the land?
That's a really good question. So the one thing that a conservation easement is good in terms of its restrictions and protections against all future landowners, but the one thing that it can't do is absolutely prevent a condemnation of property. So it could be a factor. You know, we actually will frequently, if there's condemnation action, we might put up the argument that, look, we've conserved this land. Please find another place to do what you need to do, or don't do it at all. But we don't have the power to stop it through the easement. Could I mention one thing too that I didn't in answering your prior question? The question might arise in people's minds, well, why would I restrict my property from 100 homes down to many fewer homes? And that's a really good question, because obviously there's value frequently that is being removed from the property that's important to landowners, and that's important to us because it's important to them. And so we try to find ways to incentivize landowners to do that, to protect the conservation values. And that can come in different ways. One is there are some tax deductions and tax credits that are available at the federal and state level, but not everybody can take advantage of those because it relies on the amount of income tax paid to defray that. The other thing is that there are funding sources that we can sometimes bring to those projects at the state level, at the county level. In some counties, like Charleston County has a great funding program, and sometimes from federal sources as well, like the NRCS and others. So those are there to try to help encourage landowners to put these conservation protections in place and compensate them for that.
Got it. And just a little backstory. The reason why I even asked that is because when I mentioned yesterday that my great grandmother had passed and she had land that my family members were dealing with, that land also happens to be in the area where the 526 extension is going on. So literally over like the last year, I've been going to different meetings and then came across like this program and everything else. So I'm really happy to be here. And this is great information that you guys are giving. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Feel free to reach out if you have additional questions.
Thank you. So we have just about 3 minutes, so we have time for 2 more questions. So yes, you can. Yes, you can.
Let me first thank you guys for what you do. Awesome, awesome work. Thank you. I really do commend you for standing up for folks who have very little voice in the process. Thank you so much. And you really did answer a lot of questions that I had, but I have a specific question that relates directly to my family. The community where I grew up is a little pinhole in the middle of West Bay Coast, what used to be West Bay Coast land, and that's an expansive piece of property. Anyway, the development started, of course, at the end of Summers Drive, which used to be nothing, which now is the place to live, and it's just booming. The other end of that is there are 727 acres that are being sold, and thanks to East Conservancy, you've heard about them? Okay, they are doing just what you're talking about. And my question is, here we are, that little pinhole in the middle of that. Yeah, we've got a lot of land back there. We've got over 300 acres of heirs property, a lot of land. It sounds really, I know you go, oh my gosh, you guys. Now, what does that do with, because all around us is really restricted now. What does that do for the landholders? How does that restrict us as far as what we can do with our land? Their property, the road that runs through our community or to get to and through our community, of course, that's a part of their land, which, right away, they have to give us right away, which they've always done. What impact does that have on us as a community?
First, I'm going to give you my card.
Oh, thank you. Hey,
I'd love to
got
talk
something
to you
out
more
of the
about
deal.
that.
Yes.
And I saw that on the app. The great thing
Yes,
about
I
the app,
did put
saw
it out there. Yes.
And the East Edisto Conservancy is a unique situation where the timber companies set up these declarations of covenants on that land before putting it in other people's hands, with varying levels of restrictions on it. And they have a website, eastedisto.com. It's got a lot of information that's hard to work through.
Thank you.
So
yes.
So and I myself have not fully worked through it. You saw that there's like an original declaration, and there's either like 4 to 9 amendments.
Exactly.
So what I was going to say is, I'd be happy to work, because
Thank you. I appreciate
I'd like to make sure I understand the place that you're talking about fully.
I've got all of the information on my laptop over there.
Okay, well, let's definitely talk. But
Yes.
I think that the direct restriction on you shouldn't be anything because of the fact that no landowner can convey a restriction, so to speak, on property they don't own. The only thing that I could think of that might possibly affect you, well, not the only thing, but access into your property. I don't know if there's anything that
we've got access to the property, yes.
but obviously the impacts of what happened next
impact,
door could
exactly.
be very significant.
Exactly.
So I'd love to sit down.
Thank you. I'd love that too. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
How you doing? My question is for Chris, concerning the seawall project in the Rosemont community. I went to high school with a lot of those, I got a lot of friends in that area, and I go to church with a lot of those families. Is there any awareness or contact information or anything like that with the people that are actually in that community?
Yeah, so we've started meeting with some conservation groups and that community, over the last several months. And there's going to be a meeting actually on Saturday, next Saturday at Rosemont. So you would be welcome to come. But we're starting to develop relationships. And one of the things that's coming up on the seawall is this comment deadline. And we're trying to help folks that want to weigh in and submit comment letters to go ahead and do
Is
that.
there like a website or any place that they can go to, or a number they can call?
There's a website for like submitting comment letters, but right now there's like an email group that's communicating, and if you will give me your email, I will loop you into that if you want to.
Yes, sir.
Okay, great.
I have a question for David. David, you talked about Aries property owners gaining access and benefits from easements. And I guess my question is, for instance, what can you do on an easement, right? Like here in the symposium, we've been talking about the timber industry and forestry practices. Are there other types of, I guess, entrepreneurship, economic opportunities that you can, install on an easement to still make money, even though you are, in a way, kind of letting go of your development rights? Yeah.
It's a good question. So every easement, if it's a conservation easement, every easement is different. And it's a discussion between the landowner and the land trust as to what is this property's conservation values, what are the things we're trying to protect about it, and then what are the other interests of the landowner, which could be financial interests, it could be just their love of the land, or some kind of some various things. So we get into a conversation with people, and the document that records the restrictions and the reserve rights is a result of that conversation. So, but what people do, I mean, people do, they do commercial forestry on easement land. They do agriculture on easement land. They can do, home-based businesses. They could have a farm stand. It really varies. And ultimately, the goal is, it's not just to not have development happen. It's to be protecting something that's important for conservation that affects both that property and potentially and usually the area around it as well. So like water quality, protecting the water quality in a creek that there's runoff from the property on. So I always say, we don't want to restrict the value of the land and the ability of the landowner to endow their future ownership by being able to make money any more than is necessary to accomplish those conservation goals, because it's really important. Nobody wants the people to end up on the land and not be able to afford to own it. So it's a case by case thing, but we're not against people making money. What we're just trying to do is accomplish conservation.
Okay, well, thank you. Join me in thanking Chris DeScherer, David Ray, and Dr. Janae Davis. So at this time, I'm welcoming our COO, Josh Walden, for closing remarks.
Hello, everyone. It has been a jam-packed day and a half. I hope everyone found something that they're going to take home with them and something they learned. I know I've been with the center since '09, and I've attended every symposium, and I always take something new home and always learn something new. So hopefully everyone shares with that experience. I'm Josh Walden. I'm the Chief Operating Officer with the center. Want to say I can speak on behalf of the entire center. I'm sure it's been a pleasure to spend the last 2 days with all of you. We're certainly appreciative of those who had the opportunity to be here in person. As was said earlier and yesterday, I'll reiterate that it's been wonderful to be in a building with other people, see flesh and blood and not a screen. And we also want to thank those who are joining us virtually. By all accounts, we've got a lot of feedback that people have really enjoyed the symposium, really enjoyed the speakers. And at the end of the day, all these speakers are what make this conference what it is, and conveying that information and being sure that the landowners and the people who are in attendance leave with something of value. And I think we accomplished that, hopefully. And I suppose to put a bow on the symposium, there are certain folks we want to thank at the end of the day. So get your hands warm. So we'll be clapping out for folks who, without their efforts, the symposium itself over the last 2 days would not be possible. And folks who, absent their efforts, the center's work as a whole would not be possible. And you know what? I learned something from Ray Jean yesterday. That is, one on a certain level, we always we couldn't have this event without the support of our donors and sponsors. The folks that provide the funds to reserve this building, provide the funds that it takes and the cost that it takes to put on this every year. So mentioning them on the front end, the USDA, that's the United States Department of Agriculture, Office of Advocacy and Outreach, USDA National Institute for Food and Agriculture, the Southern Sustainable Agricultural Research and Education, Ag First Farm Credit Bank, in Viva, and the South Carolina Sustainable Forestry Initiative Implementation Committee. So if you'll join me in recognizing them and their support by giving them a round of applause. I think the information that's been conveyed over the last 2 days, and I've been to every symposium, there's been such a wide breadth of information from a lot of different areas. I think, and I've heard this from several attendees, that this has been, in their opinion, the best symposium we've ever had. And at the end of the day, again, that comes from who we have presenting the information. So we want to thank our keynote speaker, Dr. Faith Rivers James, as well as all of the speakers who have attended yesterday and presented yesterday and today. And thank you for your time and your expertise and the information you conveyed. I know it's much appreciated by our constituency, and let's give them a round of applause too. The one of the favorite parts for me of the symposium every year is the WCA graduation and seeing new folks come into the fold. As has been mentioned ad nauseum, I know that these folks are our connections to the community. They are the folks who are on the ground and spread the mission word about the center and the resource we can be for the communities that they live in. At the end of the day, we couldn't do what we do without them, and they are vitally important. And so at this time, let's thank those who are standing WCAs as well as the new class for 2021. Another group that are here are landowners. You know, the folks who avail themselves of our services, who proactively reached out, took a chance, worked with an organization that maybe at one time they had no idea who we were, whether they could trust us, whether we would do what we say we were going to do, and have become part of the family. As Dr. Stevens stated yesterday, your success is our success. We go as you go, and you're the reason we exist. So to that end, let's have a round of applause for our landowners. And last but not least, would all the employees of the center stand up for me just real quick? We used to have people name themselves off, and we're getting so large now it would take a half hour. But to this group, this is an incredible staff. I've been here since '09, and I know when I joined the center we were 5 folks, and we're up to 33, and it's definitely not static. It's constantly growing, and I can share from personal experience that this group of people, old and new, have a dedication to the mission and a straightforward, no-nonsense approach to accomplishing what our end goal is. And obviously the work, these are the people that make everything happen as far as what the center does. And we want to recognize them and thank them. And also, because my boss texted me, Jenny could not be here today, but she wanted me to pass this along to the staff. When you close, please be sure to state how proud I am of my wonderful team who does such a great job. I'm proud to be part of this team. So I just wanted to let everyone know that. All right, and y'all can sit down now, I know you know. And I did want to drill down a little bit for the outreach team. If you'll just stand back up, since you know, there's not that many. The outreach team, well, on the front end, this symposium is an organization-wide effort. There are people from every department that participated in the task force and the committees associated with the various aspects of this symposium. The outreach team, Director Alexis Stevens, and the group back there are responsible for doing everything that makes this event run smoothly. The proverbial duck skimming across the pond, they're the feet under the water. They're working, right? And a wonderful job. I can't, you know, and that's come from several different sources. And even to drill down a little bit further, Rajon Lewis, right? Who's go ahead. Rajon was responsible for handling the Hoover app, the hybrid portion of this project. What I've learned from viewing what they had to go through to make this look as smooth and seamless as it appears is it's almost like coming and putting together two events at the same time. And they did a wonderful job. And just thank you. Thank you. And in conclusion, thanks again to everyone here. It was really nice to be on site. It was really nice to have a hybrid aspect to the symposium, so folks who didn't have the opportunity to be here in person could join in. I think we broke a record as far as number of people in attendance. I think last year was around 180, 190, and this year I think we're in the 280s. 280s. So thank all of you, and with that, we are finished. Go and have, oh, what? Sure, come on.
All right, so winners were sent out on Hoover for yesterday's virtual networking. I hope y'all enjoyed the virtual networking, those who were able to do it. It was really fun, I enjoyed it. The winner was Clifton King, the fourth. So he won a $25 gift card. And then Jenny McKeever won the leaderboard in Hoover. She had, I want to say, 88,000 points. So she did a really good job. And so she also won a $25 gift card. Miss Cheryl, I know we got Miss Cheryl. I know. Thank you. I love you. All right. And the last thing I wanted to say is many people have asked about the presentations. I've already set up a email for 2 o'clock that's going to send you a PDF with all of the presentations in one document. Our amazing, can you stand up in the back, Thomas? Can we give it up for Thomas? Thomas did an amazing job of making sure that the virtual option ran smoothly. Me and him have been going back and forth on this thing for the last 3 days now. So I know he's ready to go home and get some rest. But thank you so much, Thomas. But once he sends me the videos, there were certain sessions that were recorded. I will send you a link to those videos. So if you want to share those with your family members or if you want to rewatch them, that's perfectly fine as well. And the last thing is at 1 o'clock in Hoover, also as well as an email, I sent you all a feedback survey. Please complete that survey. It's very important that we have the feedback to know what we did well, where we can improve, so next year can be an even better symposium. Thank you, Josh. That's all I got.
Thank you, Rajon. That's a wonderful point to end on. We'll see you next year. All right? Bye.